Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm very excited about this topic. Today, we're talking about program delivery, so the different credentialing pathways and modes of delivery that are available at the University of Calgary, and some of the potential pathways that you can explore as you think about new program innovation in your units, or perhaps redesigning existing programs in your units. My name is Jaclyn Carter, and I am the facilitator for this workshop series. I am an educational development consultant with the Taylor Institute, and my focus is on program innovation and curricular renewal. And I'm joined today by two experts in these areas, Kelly Hoglund, a program innovation partner in the Office of the Provost and our Program Innovation Hub, and Dr. Alysia Wright, who is our educational development consultant in the TI, who specializes in blended and online learning, among other things. So before I turn it over to our presenters for today, I want to first acknowledge that we are coming to you live from the University of Calgary, or our homes in the surrounding areas, and that these are located in the heart of Southern Alberta. We acknowledge, of course, and pay tribute to the traditional territories of the peoples of Treaty 7, which include the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. We are very privileged to be able to bring these workshops to you from this space, and we find more and more, and in a very positive light, that these conversations around Indigenous ways of knowing are happening in all the different spaces and aspects of program innovation. So it might not be top of mind in the presentation today, but it is embedded in all that we do. And so we're grateful to be able to do this work, and to connect you to further resources that will support this going forward. Just a few learning outcomes for the session today. We're going to introduce you to the various credential structures offered at the University of Calgary. So for example, laddered versus standalone credentials. We will review the available modes of program delivery and distinguish between them. So what's the difference between face-to-face versus blended versus online, and what some of the advantages and challenges will be with each of those. And just give you some ideas of what factors you'll want to consider when determining which program structure or modality makes the most sense for your program.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see you here today. I see a good mix of familiar faces and folks I haven't had the opportunity to meet before. So today I want to chat with you a bit about credentials and laddering and the different options that are available here at the university. But before we get too much into that, I just want to make sure that we have a kind of common understanding of what is permitted. And so all of our credentials that we offer must align with the Alberta Credential Framework. And I think Jaclyn's going to pop the link or the file into the chat so that you can see it. And the Alberta Credentials Framework is based on the Canada Degree Qualifications Framework. And so Jaclyn will be preparing a link to that as well. And so what these do is they set out kind of what is expected for each type of credential offered by universities and colleges across the country and in the province. So at the U of C, we can offer certificates, diplomas, and degrees at some different levels, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And credentials can either be standalone or laddered. And so standalone, you directly enter that program, and laddered, you enter through a different pathway. And I'm not sure if anyone is here interested in non-credit credentialing, professional development type and continuing education type of credentials. We do have a non-credit credential framework here at the university, and I'm happy to share that with you at the end of the session if you're interested. The session today is going to focus mostly on credit programming, but there's a lot of similarities between credit and non-credit, and how they function, and the laddering piece. So next slide, Jaclyn. All right. So these are the different types of certificates we'd be able to offer at the university. We don't offer all types, um, but there's a post-bachelor's certificate, a graduate certificate, postmaster's, and postdoctoral certificates. And so you can see the number of units required or course credit hours required in each type of certificate varies, as does the typical duration. The types of certificates we have right now are graduate certificates and one postdoctoral certificate. We currently don't have any postmaster's certificates or post-bachelor's. And just to note, a post-bachelor's certificate is when the courses are at the undergraduate level, but in order to gain admission to the program, students have to already have a bachelor's degree. Graduate certificates, the courses are at the master's level. Postmasters, the courses are at the doctoral level, and postdoctoral is there anything beyond doctoral level? It's about that. It's a continuation basically of doctoral level studies. So next slide. So on the diploma side, it's very similar to the certificates. There's graduate, postmasters, and postdoctoral. You'll notice we don't have any post-bachelor's diplomas listed there. So the graduate diplomas, we have several here at the university. 3 are listed there. There's the graduate diploma in educational research in Workland, a graduate diploma in data science and analytics in the Faculty of Science, and a graduate diploma in precision health over in the Cummings School of Medicine. We also have one postdoctoral diploma, and so these postdoctoral programs are the only postdoctoral programs in the province. And it's specifically right now we only have them in radiation oncology. So these are for folks who have an MD and a PhD and want to do radiation oncology. All right, next slide. And so this is the one that I'm sure everyone is familiar with already. The types of degrees we offer. So we offer bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees. Their typical number of units is listed there. For bachelor's, it's normally 120 units. Some programs are more, such as engineering. Masters are very variable, as are doctoral programs. It's worth noting that any of the degrees might be research-based or professionally oriented. And so when you think about professionally oriented degrees, you're going to think about the Doctor of Design, the Master of Education, the course-based Master of Social Work, the Master of Data Science and Analytics. And at the bachelor's level, the Bachelor of Science in Nursing, Bachelor of Social Work, and I mean, these are more professional programs, but the JD and the MD programs are also considered undergraduate programs. But the real distinction between professionally oriented graduate programs, and I'm focusing on graduate because that's where we have most of the different types of credentialing here at the university in terms of certificates and diplomas. The real distinction there is that in professionally oriented master's programs, the outcome is that they're looking for the unique application of knowledge. And then in the research-based programs, they're looking for the creation of new knowledge. So that's kind of where that distinguishing factor comes in. In certain programs and certain faculties and disciplines, that distinction is quite blurred. Thinking about education and social work, where practice and theory tend to converge quite often. All right, so Jaclyn, can you put the next slide? So before we get into talking more in depth about the different credential types and structures, I just want to get you thinking about some of the different factors to consider when you're determining the right type of credential for your program. So you really need to think about your target audience. So are they high school graduates, degree holders, working professionals, a combination thereof, or another demographic altogether? Are you going to have a research-based or professional program? And what do you want to accomplish in the program? What are your learning outcomes? How many do you have? What level are they at? What do students need to know? And so this can inform like how many courses you're going to need, how many units, and then you can align that in with the credentialing structures. And then, and thinking about the number of units each credential type requires and how many courses it would take to meet those PLOs. Are there accreditation requirements? So if you're creating a certificate, for example, that ladders into a degree program, is that degree accredited? Do you need to meet certain accreditation requirements? And then, of course, resources. And so this could be a whole topic in and of itself. But what financial resources, infrastructure, human resources for both support staff and academic staff do you need or already have to offer this program? So that's a lot to think about. But I just wanted to kind of plant that seed as we start looking at the other type or at the structures. The next slide, Jaclyn. Okay, so this might seem very basic to some and very foreign to others, and it's kind of one of the frequently asked questions I get when I'm consulting with faculties and units across campus and helping them with their program innovation initiatives. It's what do we have to play with? What is involved in a program? How are they set up? So we kind of have three fields to play with here. We have the credential, which is it a master's? Is it a graduate certificate? Is it a PhD? The area of study or major. So these are all graduate level examples that we offer at the university. And at the bachelor's level, this would be a major. So if you had a Bachelor of Science, that would be the credential. The major would be mathematics, for example. And then the specialization is a sub-degree specialization. So it's below the major, below the area of study. And so you can see, I pulled a couple examples there. If you were doing the Master of Education in Educational Research, you could do a specialization in adult learning. They have several other specializations, that's just one. And if you were doing the Graduate Certificate in Advanced Nursing Practice 1, one of the specializations you could choose is oncology nursing. So specializations allow students to kind of pick a sub area within a certain credential to focus their studies on. And depending on what you're creating or changing, it may or may not require approval from the Ministry of Advanced Education. So if you're creating a new credential or a new area of study or major, that would require approval from the Ministry of Advanced Education. If you're creating a new specialization, that needs internal University of Calgary approval. And I'll talk shortly about the approvals process. All right, I think that's it for that one. Another question I get a lot is, how long would it take to create a new program or make changes to an existing program? And the answer to that is it depends, and it depends on a lot of factors. So how long does it take from coming up with the idea for a new program to implementing it? There's a few things that feed into that. The first is the time for proposal development. So this can vary from a couple months to 2 or more years, depending on what you're doing. So are you creating a new degree? Are you creating a new certificate? Degrees are more complex. Certificates can be, 4 courses. So it's a little more straightforward. And then the extent and number of consultations that are needed for that program and the capacity of the proponents to work on the proposal. So if you have someone who gets 1 or more teaching releases, or you have support staff that support the program development process to dedicate their time to this, it can shorten the time. If you have someone who's doing this off the side of their desk and it's very complicated or in a larger program, then that will take longer. And then also, how much of a priority is this in your unit, in your department, in your faculty, and in the institution as a whole? And that prioritization tends to also lead to the resources and capacity piece. It's a high priority in your faculty. They want to put some resources in there to support its development. The development of the proposal will take a shorter amount of time. So
Kelly,
then
there's
once
a
you have,
question in the
oh,
chat. Sorry to interrupt.
okay, yeah, no
Um,
worries.
just about whether programs have residency requirements or if, for example, they can be completed solely online.
Yeah, so there's no rule about a program needing to have a certain amount of face-to-face time. So if you design a program, it could be fully face-to-face, it could be fully online, or it could be blended. And so that just depends on your program and the needs, and we'll get into that later with.
And also it depends on the accreditation requirements. So if you're creating a program that has accreditation standards or requirements, sometimes there will be restrictions around how much of the program can be online, how much of it can be blended, and how much of it needs to be face to face. So it is very important to check those accreditation standards.
Another question we get a lot is how long does the approvals process take? So that can be about 6 months at the university, but you just need to, so that's just for our internal approvals process, but it depends when you start, because if you're not done by the end of June, there's a summer break when there's no committee meetings. And then when you're planning out your timeline, you also need to factor in, and then if it needs, I'll back up a bit, for government approval, depending on the type of credential or change that you have proposed that needs government approval, that could add 4 to 12 months onto the timeline. So this example that I use here is one that needs government approval. And so in this case, government approval took 8 months or 10 months, sorry, which is pretty fast for the government. Just, we look at 4 to 12 months, usually 12 months for new degree programs. And then you need to factor in your recruitment and admissions period, so that it takes time to attract students, process applications, send offers of admission, and get them here, whether that's virtually or in person. So overall, from the time of the start, when you start writing your proposal until students are in seats in your courses, that could take almost 3 years. And that's a pretty smooth so we do a lot that are on shorter timelines. This would be more ideal because it gives you a full recruitment cycle, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So if you want the full recruitment cycle that starts in the fall term for the next fall, then you would be looking at about 3 years to have everything done. All right, next slide. I just want to talk briefly about the approvals process. So these are the different committees in the university and the internal approvals process that you'd have to go through. Happy to provide additional information on this later. I just wanted to show that there are different committees, and depending if you're doing a graduate program or an undergraduate program, the process is slightly different. So again, that internal approvals process is 4 to 8 months, because committees meet about once a month. And then the ministry approvals process is another 4 to 12 months or so. Also keep in mind that a lot of faculties, before their faculty council, proposals have to go to a department council, potentially a graduate program or undergraduate program committee, and then other subcommittees within the faculty before it goes to their faculty council. So that'll add time. And if it's an interdisciplinary program being run by more than one department or faculty, that will add committee meetings, which could also add time. All right, next slide. Okay, so sorry to abruptly switch tracks here, but it's just really important when you're considering program changes to consider the time, consider the process, and think about all those credentialing structures and how that all fits together before you really start figuring out what type of entrance and progression And if there's going to be a laddering structure, what does that look like? You kind of have to take care of all of those other things first. So as I've mentioned before, you need to consider how students could enter and progress through the credential. So are they going to enter the credential directly, or are they going to ladder? Next slide. So when we talk about direct entry, we're talking about the traditional way of entering and completing a program. So the student applies into that credential, they get accepted and are admitted, and start the program. They then complete the requirements for that program, and then they graduate from that program. So they go into one credential, they finish it, and then they're done. And so this is what we're used to. When we talk about laddering, so I've put the calendar definition here. This is what we have in our graduate calendar. But I'll sum it up for you that basically students progress through a succession of credentials, and then they can bring the course credits they earn in one credential forward to the next one. And then when students move through a laddered pathway, they get a parchment for each credential they complete. So if a student was to do the Master of Nursing through the laddered pathway, which I'll talk about shortly, they will get 2 certificates and a degree parchment by the time they're finished them all. And there's more of an administrative load on the student in laddering because they have to apply and be accepted to each credential. So there's up to 3 application and admission cycles and 3 graduations. Next slide. So there's a couple ways that we can structure credentials to ladder. So the first one is the certificate, diploma, master's. So in this case, a student comes in, does a graduate certificate. Let's say they do 4 3-unit courses to get that 12 units, and then they apply to the graduate diploma. So the graduate diploma requires 24 units of coursework, but 12 of those units is laddering credit that the student's carrying forward from the certificate program. And then the student will do 12 units of new coursework, so 4 more courses. Then the student can apply to the master's degree. So if the master's degree as a whole requires 36 units, the student will bring forward the 24 units of laddering credit from their graduate diploma and certificate programs, and then they will do 12 more units of coursework to hit that 36. Does that make sense? Any questions at this point?
Kelly, maybe I could just ask for clarification. If a program decides to offer this structure, is there a mechanism for a student to apply directly into the diploma, given this advanced credit structure?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it really depends on the program. So some programs allow direct entry to the diploma anytime. So like the Master of Data Science and Analytics, you can apply right into the diploma before you do the master's, or you can apply right into the master's, or you can start with the certificate. So there's lots of options there. In education, they will allow direct admission to the diploma program in certain circumstances, but you need approval. So it really depends. And other than, and I just want to point out that in this example here, the units are just examples. So the number of units to complete a master's degree varies considerably. Some are 30 units, some are 27 units, some are 36, some are 39. It's very dependent on the program and the discipline and what they need. And the minimums for a graduate certificate is 12 units, and the minimum for a graduate diploma is 18 units. So you could conceivably have a graduate certificate that's 15 units, and then a graduate diploma that's 21 units in this laddering structure. So again, it depends what you need to accomplish when in your program, and then that goes back to your learning outcomes. Next slide. All right, so I've talked about a couple of these examples already. There are programs that use the certificate diploma master's model here at the university, the Master of Education, the Master of Data Science and Analytics, the Master of Precision Health, and the Master of Quantum Computing. All right, next slide. So other programs, they have a certificate master's model. So in this case, students do one graduate certificate, and then they do another graduate certificate, and then they apply to the master's degree, and they carry forward the 24 units that they've completed in the two graduate certificates. So some of the reasons why programs might do this, and this is relevant to a couple of our programs like the Master of Information Security and Privacy and the Master of Social Work, is that the term diploma in that profession or discipline has a specific connotation to college credentials. So if you get a diploma in social work, that's a 2-year diploma program, typically offered by colleges. And then in computer science, if you have a diploma in something related to computers and networking or network security, that's typically, again, a college or polytechnic credential. Next slide. So I mentioned a couple of these already. So besides the MSW, there's also the Master of Nursing, and then the Master of Information Security and Privacy, and the Master of Transdisciplinary Studies. I'm going to talk about that one in a second because it has a unique structure as well. Next slide. Okay, so we've talked about different types of laddering. This is unique because the certificates that ladder into the masters don't have to all be within that same faculty or program. So a student who is, we're also, just a caveat, we're awaiting approval from the ministry for the Master of Transdisciplinary Studies degree. The graduate certificates are going to start in the next year for the first certificate, and graduate certificate 2 will start in 2025. So in this case, a student could do the graduate certificate in Transdisciplinary Studies 1, which is 13.5 units. So it's different than our other certificate programs, which are pretty much all 12 units. And then they can combine that with almost any other graduate certificate program offered at the University of Calgary. So they could do Transdisciplinary Studies 1, and then they could do a graduate certificate in educational research, or a graduate certificate in data science, or what have you, whatever. There's a whole list of different certificate programs that are permitted to ladder into the masters. And then they'll bring those 25.5 units of laddering credit forward into the masters, where they'll do the last 12 units. So this master's is 37.5 units. So what we're seeing right now is units that maybe don't want to create a new master's degree, maybe they don't want to create a laddered pathway into their current master's degree, but they see an opportunity for offering a graduate program in certificate form to their specific population of students. So it depends on the discipline, but they tend to know kind of their target market, and they know what students need. So they could create a standalone graduate certificate, or they could ladder into the Master of Transdisciplinary Studies, or they could create a new specialization within the 2 transdisciplinary certificate programs. So that probably sounds very complicated, and I'm happy to answer more questions later. But if you think back to that slide where I talked about we have those different fields to play with in terms of creating new programs, the credential, the area of study, and the specialization. In terms of transdisciplinary, there are specializations within each certificate, and a unit could create a new specialization. All right, next slide. So with laddering, we certainly have seen a lot of different programs introduce laddering structures over the years, either to existing degrees or to new degrees that they've created. And there's different opportunities and challenges involved with laddering. So the increased flexibility is really nice. Students can balance their education with work and other commitments. They can take breaks between sets of courses without needing to take a leave of absence. So if they did a graduate certificate and they wanted to wait a year before they started the diploma, they could. They could just wait a year before they apply. This could potentially expand the recruitment pool for a master's degree. It offers new pathways. It could potentially expand the accessibility of the educational opportunities. Students get one or more credentials that recognize their work. So let's say a student does the 4 courses for the certificate and they're like, I'm done with school for now or forever. They get a credential that recognizes that work. So I've listed the possible challenges here. I think we're going to post the slides after, so I'm not going to read all of this out. And that kind of wraps this up. So I'm going to turn this back over to Allie.
I'm going to start talking now about modality and hopefully giving you some insights into what modality means for you as you start planning. And hopefully I'll address some of these supports that you need. So let's just start at the basics. So our calendar, our academic calendar, defines our instructional modalities in 3 ways. Okay, so when we're designing programs, I always recommend that folks go back to our calendar scheduling. That is, we have in-person instruction, which is your traditional in-person localized program at U of C. Requiring classroom space, on-site instruction, administrative support, et cetera, that are all physically present and accounted for. This is also where your students are going to be engaged. So making sure that when you're thinking about in-person, you are considering those different considerations: space, time, people. Blended learning. So blended learning is where we combine elements of face-to-face or in-person delivery with what our scheduling group calls web-based instruction. So this would be perhaps a flipped class, for example. You might have students going through course materials online, and then your day in class every week is spent in labs or doing practical work. Blended courses can have different ratios of in-person and online components, but it is important that you consider what those are going to be at the onset. And finally, web-based instruction. We understand this to be colloquially online learning. So this is where courses are taught completely online with no in-person components. However, online instruction often includes a blend of synchronous and asynchronous content. So, synchronous Zoom sessions like this combined with asynchronous self-directed learning. You can also have fully asynchronous courses where students are going through their course content independent of their peers or even their instructors. They are moving through a course in a completely self-paced, self-directed mode. And they complete their assignments, their materials, and everything else completely on their own. So these are the modes of delivery that we're working with at the University of Calgary. Now, what I want to really emphasize here are that there are some really innovative options that you can do when you are designing programs. So for example, you might choose to offer a hybrid program. That would be hybrid courses in a program. That would be in the case of maybe you want to connect remote students and face-to-face students in one course. That's really helpful. We've seen in like the nursing programs where we've had pilot programs where folks from remote communities are able to join online or join in-person courses in Calgary via satellite or via Zoom. So there are some really great modality options that you have if you do want to get innovative. When you are looking at program design, I want to put forward some questions here for you to consider. Now, I am going to put a link up in the chat with some conversation starters that we have created around designing new online academic programs. Now, I want to caveat this and say that the questions in this document are actually quite broadly applicable to all modalities, because we're starting the conversation by saying, how are we even going to do this, right? So we have this program idea, but we need to think about what meets the needs of the students and the instructors that you're working with, right? When we're thinking about modality, that informs all of our decisions, from program design, course design, who's going to be teaching the courses, who's going to be designing the courses, what infrastructure and resource support do we require. We have funding questions, and this comes up for any program as well. So funding is huge. It's very important to understand what level of funding you have, what has been allocated to you. Are there conditions or constraints associated with that funding? Is anything contingent upon you delivering a program a certain way? Like earlier, I mentioned that there are accreditation standards to consider. Not all programs, not all accredited programs are going to support all modalities. So you really have to think through and think critically about what are you trying to achieve. I'm not going to read what's on the slide because you can all read that. I know the font is a bit small, but we will be sharing these slides back. But please take a look at that document that I placed in the chat, and this should help kind of start you on that journey. On the next slide, be prepared. There's a lot of content here. So again, please take it and maybe review it afterwards or with this recording. But there's a few key things that I want to highlight here. So what we've done is we've identified, okay, if we have in-person options, online options, and blended options, what are we considering? So similar to what we just heard from One Health, fully in-person courses were a bit too rigid to be able to meet all of the needs of the learners that they hope to attract. So they are hoping to move to a more hybrid, I would call that a more hybrid program. So when we talk about hybrid programs, we are talking specifically about programs that bridge remote students with in-person students. I have not highlighted that here in this table because the University of Calgary does not have a designated modality for that yet. I believe that will probably come along with the digital learning strategy that will come out in a few years. So for the sake of this conversation, I'm just going to be focusing on blended online and in-person. What I want to draw your attention to, perhaps first and foremost, are resource requirements. This is something that I think we all need to focus on when we're thinking about new programs. So once you've decided what kind of credential you want to offer, it is imperative to consider what resources you have at your disposal to offer that program to make it sustainable. So for example, in person, we know at the University of Calgary right now that classroom space is at a premium, right? So we want to make sure that if we're offering small or large classes, that we have adequate classroom space to dedicate to those new programs and courses. We want to ensure that we have the appropriate equipment, that we have the appropriate tools in those classrooms. So if you're creating lab-based spaces, do we have adequate resources for the students? We also need to think about the support staff required. Now, these considerations are very important across modalities, but here's where they change a bit. If we're looking at doing an online program or even several online courses in a program, I invite you to really consider who's going to be teaching those courses, who's going to be designing those courses, and how are you going to be evaluating those courses. We also need to think about how we're going to be delivering the courses. So for example, at the University of Calgary, we have several platforms that you can use. Obviously, we have D2L, our primary learning management system. We also have access to Top Hat. And a lot of instructors have used Top Hat successfully in their programs, and that can be a useful platform. We've also seen folks take a more independent route where they use independent tools or platforms to host their online courses. Whatever you decide for your program is going to help you plan for those logistical decisions. And I encourage everyone to think about this at the onset, at the ideation stage of your program. It is very tempting when we're designing programs to go completely in person at first, where we think, oh, we could just add some online courses later. Or if we need to, we can, throw in some blended learning. I really want to encourage everyone in this space to think about modality as a bit more important than that, because it's not so simple to only take or an online or a face-to-face course and just put it online. I think we've all learned that through emergency remote teaching, right? So we have a duty as instructors, as program administrators, and as folks who are creating these new programs and credentials to think about how best to deliver these courses so that students get a high quality learning experience. For example, it might be really useful for you to provide online courses that focus on fundamentals. Perhaps, those more theoretical courses, the courses where you're talking about research or methodologies, courses where students are interacting with content in a more cerebral manner. Those might be really good courses to have online, and they might also improve your reach. You might be able to have more students attend those classes because you'll have more capacity instructionally and with the digital learning environment. However, it might make most sense for you to offer localized in-person practicum offerings or field-based learning experiences. And what's great about this is if you have partners in other regions, you can do this beyond your own localized center. So that's another thing to consider when we are looking at program design, are how can we partner? If we do want to do something in person, but we also want to make it available to folks across the country, and we understand that that mobility for education might be limited, well, that leads us into the opportunity to have meaningful educational partners in other regions. And that is a planning piece that has to be considered at the onset. So I hope these examples give you some ideas around how important modality really is and how central it should be to the planning process. I also just want to touch on the types of students that we're trying to reach. So often, especially in our post-COVID era, we are looking at issues around accessibility and high quality education and making it more available to folks. Right? We know now that there are tons of barriers that students have faced to acquiring or obtaining these degrees that will help them be successful in the career field. That's why we're here. We want to innovate. Well, to innovate, we have to do things differently. That's the whole point. So when we're looking at our programs, it's very helpful for us to look at what we've traditionally done and say, okay, how can we expand this? How can we make this more meaningful for folks? So I encourage you to think about that. I know we have Aaron Williams here. He has done some incredible fieldwork experiences for students that I know I've personally been inspired by. And the way that those offerings have been delivered has really expanded the worlds of many students. I don't mean to call you out, Aaron, but seeing the way that he's designed some of those experiences kind of challenged the norms of how they were done before. And I think when we look at modality as a central feature of program design, we'll find ourselves able to innovate in ways that we might not have thought of previously. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to leave you with a few key considerations here. So if you leave here with nothing else from me, I hope that you come away understanding that modality decisions are central to your ideation and program design steps. I'm really hoping that I've also cemented with you all that designing online and blended courses requires significant time, planning, and resources to design and deliver. It is an absolute heartache when we design really great programs and then we realize we don't have the instructional capacity to deliver them. So making sure that we have the appropriate people in place to do this work will be key. And that's where we get to that adequate instructional support and staffing. So these are just some key ideas and hopes that I want to leave you with. And I'm happy to discuss or to have any meetings with folks if you are curious about how to design with modality in mind. So I think we wanted to open it up now. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Just to questions from the group that if we haven't addressed them, if you have any now, we'd be happy to answer them.
I know it can feel incredibly overwhelming to start this process, and often we feel like we're working in a very closed silo in our unit. But we just want to emphasize that the resources in the Taylor Institute and the Program Innovation Hub are really there to guide you every step of the way. So I think somebody mentioned, help with creating the proposal documents, and that is what the program proposal liaison, so Kelly's role, as well as some other colleagues in the Program Innovation Hub, are there to do. So you'll be assigned a person from the Program Innovation Hub if you wish for that support, who can kind of walk you through and offer as much support as you need to get your proposal from that sort of ideation stage through to, if it's appropriate, ministry approval. In terms of the budget pieces, I know the finance thing came up. I just wanted to let you know that the primary point of contact for that would be your faculty's finance partner. We also are in the process of developing a workshop directly relating to this, so how to develop a budget. It is actually catered to the finance partners themselves, but if you think that that content could be relevant for understanding more about the different components that go into building a program proposal budget, then that will be coming up and more information will be out on that soon. And also just to keep in mind that as your proposal moves through the approvals process, you'll have several sets of eyes on that budget and on all components of the proposal. So your program proposal liaison will be there to support you. The decision support team is there to support you, and that actually includes leadership from the finance team at the University of Calgary. And then at every level of the approvals process, like at all the committees, you'll get feedback, and no one is expecting that you'll have an absolutely perfect proposal when you hit that first step. The idea is that you receive the feedback at each stage and from each person that you consult with, and that the proposal continues to evolve as it gets closer to that final approval stage. So there's plenty of resources within the Program Innovation Hub and Finance. And lastly, I'm there from the Taylor Institute, and I will help facilitate connections to other members of our team like Ali, but also we have expertise in instructional design and technology. We have expertise in how to meaningfully incorporate EDIA, or Indigenous ways of knowing, into your program design. We have a new person coming on who will specialize in clinical and lab settings. So there's lots of expertise, and it's really my job to make sure that you have those resources and are able to access them. So don't ever feel like you're going at this alone, because we have teams set up to support you. Kelly, I have a question for you. What, if anything, is happening in terms of modularization or stackable credentials in the undergraduate space?
That's a good question, Jaclyn. So in the undergraduate space, well, for the institution as a whole, there's the development of a micro-credential framework, which will reference laddering. I think right now they've worked on the non-credit side and are planning to start work on the credit side. Other provinces have provincial guidance around these spaces, but Alberta is not there yet. So we're kind of working in that ambiguous space. In terms of stacking and laddering, there's at undergrad level, there's not a lot right now. The closest we would get are kind of block transfer agreements from colleges. So 2+2s and 3+1s and things like that. So, a student does a diploma in engineering at SAIT, and they can come here and do a degree in engineering, and they get X amount of transfer credit towards their engineering degree. So it's pretty open right now, and there are lots of opportunities, I think, for innovation, but I think it's like some of the challenges that folks have pointed out in terms of capacity and budgets and fatigue and things like that.
All right, I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. Thank you so much for your patience and for listening in. There are plenty of resources that you can explore yourself as well. The Taylor Institute Resource Library is comprehensive, and Ali has actually developed several resources related to blended and online learning, including online learning modules on blended learning and developing online courses. So there's lots there to get you started if you're just looking to get some basic information. But again, don't feel like you have to do that work on your own. Reach out to us if you have questions, and if we can't answer them, we will definitely connect you to the appropriate people. And lastly, I'll just highlight that there are a few more workshops in the series for this year, and I will be sending out invitations and information on that very shortly. But just as a brief summary, at the end of March, we will be talking about curricular redesign. So whether that be small scale curricular changes that require institutional approval or large scale curricular overhaul, we'll be kind of addressing what goes into those key pieces as they become more and more frequent at the university. In April, we will be talking about budgets, and that will be led by our financial leadership team at the University of Calgary and include finance partners. Hopefully we can get representation from every faculty, but all are welcome to attend if you want that information. And in May, we will be talking about Indigenous ways of knowing and program design with our new EDC in Indigenous ways of knowing, Christine Martineau. So there's lots still to come. And as always, recordings will be made available after the workshops if you're not able to attend in real time. So thank you all so much for your participation today. We really appreciate it, and we hope that this was useful for you as you go forward.